Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm joined by my friend, Dee Pierce.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Dee, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. And we're going to consider the following topics, really four articles by Alistair Crooke, Scott Ritter, Colonel MacGregor, Douglas MacGregor, and Pepe Escobar. And what those are about, the main topic is Trump, change, and the empire, of chaos, a favorite term, of Pepe Escobar's. I see we have a few people here already, but there's Lana. Hi, Lana. Great to
Hello, Lana.
Okay, I should announce, I guess, this is my return to regular streaming. I've gotten the work done I had to get done, and I'm now ready to go full bore on streaming again. Uh, Hopefully, I'll be able to continue to do that, and we won't start getting any suppression of free speech by the Trump administration after he takes over on the 20th of June. Uh, I'm not really joking about that. I think it's a distinct possibility that there will be restrictions on free speech. Uh, so I think we're all going to have to be careful of that at some point. But I hope not for quite a long time yet.
Yes, what's his name? Zuckerberg. He was talking about that. He was on Joe Rogan, and he talked about with the Biden administration how they really dictated to him and came on to him that about what he could talk about, what he couldn't, and they had to have that whole fact check thing. And when he didn't want to do it, they were going to investigate all his companies, really do a, you know what I'm saying? They bullied him out the way it seemed. It appeared that he was bullied into the whole thing. So,
He was bullied into doing the fact checking, which itself was a way of bullying people uh, who were presenting unpopular points of view.
and that with the vaccine too, he, there
Uh,
was so much. He was told what he had to censor.
right, and he did censor. And actually, Facebook was pretty fierce at censoring.
Hmm.
We experienced actually some of their censoring, both Dee and I,
Yes.
and many others who were expressing similar views to our own were also censored, on Facebook. I think certain people didn't even appear on Facebook. They simply gave up Facebook and, were restricting themselves to YouTube, where they face some censorship also. And so a lot of them were moving over to Rumble, and we got that on. Okay, but so that's kind of an introduction to tonight's show. But let us move on to the issues of Trump change and the empire, of chaos. And the first of our articles addressing that, which I will take on, is an article by Alistair Crooke, which I picked up at the UN's review, and I'm going to share it now. The name of the article, the title, of course, is very appropriate for right now, is Can Trump Save America from Itself? And this was picked up at the UN's review by Alistair on January 10th, 2025. It was originally published at Strategic Culture Foundation, I think at about the same time. So the article starts off with a photo of Jimmy Carter and Zbig Brzezinski. Uh, a caption under the photo is Trump might simply escalate the metaphysical staircase to simply say that he alone has the vision to save America from World War III. Not entirely sure what Alistair means by the metaphysical staircase here, but perhaps as we go through his piece, that will become a little more clear. But I'm not awfully sure that it will become a little more clear. But anyway, maybe we'll be able to guess better at what it means as we go through it. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, beginning of the article, last week dismissed Team Trump's floated peace proposals for Ukraine as unsatisfactory. Well, not a surprise to most of us who were aware of Russia's point of view. Alistair goes on and says, essentially, the Russian view is that the calls for a frozen conflict precisely miss the point. From the Russian perspective, such ideas, frozen conflicts, ceasefires, and peacekeepers do not begin to qualify as the type of treaty-based, quote, big picture, unquote, deal the Russians have been advocating since 2021. They started advocating that at the beginning of 2021. It's now the beginning of 2025. Nobody's been listening to them, evidently. Going forward, though, without a sustainable, permanent end to conflict, the Russians will prefer to rely on a battlefield outcome, even at the high risk of their refusal, bringing continuing escalatory, even nuclear U.S. brinkmanship. I think the term is brinksmanship, but anyway. That term goes back a long way, actually, to the Eisenhower administration and the activities of his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. That's how old brinksmanship is. It's old. The question rather is, sustained peace between the U.S. and Russia. Is it even possible? That is Alistair's question, of course. The death of former President Jimmy Carter recalls to us that the turbulent 1970s policy of the revolution, quote unquote, which became encapsulated in the writings of Zbig Brzezinski. Okay, it's actually Zbigniew Brzezinski, but everybody used to call him Zbig. I guess they all got a laugh out of that. It's easier to say than Zbigniew, right? Carter's national security advisor, which was a revolution that bedevils U.S.-Russia relations from then until today. The Carter era saw a major inflection point with Brzezinski's invention of weaponized identitarian conflict and his espousal of the same identitarian tools as applied more widely in order to bring Western societies under the control of a technocratic elite, quote, practicing continuous surveillance over every citizen, together with elite elite actually manipulation of the behavior and intellectual functioning, okay, of all people. I'm not so sure that was really Brzezinski's vision. I mean, I read his books. I wasn't quite sure he was after continuous surveillance over every citizen, but he may have been. In which case, his concept really approached the later concept of inverted totalitarianism that was offered by Sheldon Wallen from the 1990s on. Brzezinski's seminal books, in short, advocated a managed cosmopolitan identitarian sphere that would wipe out communal culture, i.e., national values. It is in the hostile reaction to this technocratic, quote, control, unquote, vision that we can root today's trouble breaking out everywhere on all global fronts. Put plainly, current events are in many ways a replay of the turbulent 1970s. Today's march toward anti-democratic norms began with the Trilateral Commission's seminal The Crisis of Democracy, 1975. The forerunner to the World Economic Forum, that is Davos, and the Bilderberg Commission, with, in Brzezinski's words, international banks and multinational corporations being crowned as the principal creative force in the place of the nation state as the fundamental unit of man's organized life, unquote. Brzezinski's jaundiced perception of Russia was nothing new. Rather, it reaches back to the Hudson Institute in the 1970s and to Senator Henry Scoop Jackson, twice a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the 1972 and 1976 presidential elections. Jackson, of Norwegian descent, simply hated communism. He hated Russians, and he had a lot of support within the Democratic Party. Brzezinski, Polish by origin, shared Scoop Jackson's Russophobia. Now, where did the Brzezinski Russophobia come from? Well, he might have shared Scoop Jackson's Russophobia, but it didn't come from Scoop Jackson. Where it came from was the historic role of Russia in extinguishing Poland, as a European power, going all the way back to the latter part of the 17th century, and then for most of the 18th century until the independence of Poland was ended sometime in the 1790s. And then, of course, there was the domination of an independent Polish state by the Russian communists following the Second World War. There was that also, and Poland becoming a satellite. So there were many historical reasons, for Brzezinski's jaundiced perception, of Russia. Anyway, going on, Brzezinski persuaded President Carter in 1979 to insert a radicalized jihadist identity culture into Afghanistan to attrit the secular socialist culture of Kabul, which Moscow was supporting. There, I have to recall to some of you who don't know that Afghanistan, from the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, had in Kabul, the city of Kabul, the capital city, a secular socialist culture. And that statement is a statement of fact, by Alistair. And Afghanistan at that time, it was it was on the point of becoming a satellite of the Soviet Union. And of course, the Americans hated that. Brzezinski hated that. Scoop Jackson hated that. And so they developed the brilliant idea of inserting a radicalized jihadist identity culture into Afghanistan, okay, in order to get rid of the socialist culture that was bent on modernizing Afghanistan. I remember in the period from 1955 to 1960, I was at Cornell, uh, and they had someone, uh, uh, from Afghanistan, who was there as a foreign student. Uh, okay, but if I recall correctly, he was a student, okay, of economics, and he represented the secular socialist culture, okay, of Kabul. I got to know him fairly well, and he was very modern. Uh, okay, following the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, at the time that was really a shock to me because I thought Afghanistan had made a lot of progress in the area of, uh, 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 the modernization of Afghan culture. But I was mistaken about that. Okay, that was not so. The secular socialist culture of Kabul didn't get too far outside of Kabul into the countryside, which remained highly traditionalist and highly tribal and highly religious, with a fundamentalist kind, okay, of Islam. Anyway, going on with the article, the Afghan war outcome subsequently was portrayed as a huge American victory, which it wasn't. Yet, and this is the point, says Alastair, the victory claim nonetheless underpinned the notion of Islamic insurgents being the ideal, quote, solvents, unquote, in regime change projects, and still is, as we witness in Syria today. Yes. So I think this is a very important analysis from Alastair Crooke, pointing out that the root of the jihadist culture problem was in the move by the Carter administration to insert that kind of identity into Afghanistan. And that is the root of much of our troubles since, including, of course, the 9/11 attack on the United States. Uh, but going on, Brzezinski had yet more advice to give President Carter. In his 1997 grand chessboard, of course, by this time, President Carter was far removed from the corridors of power, except that he was still writing some very good books on those kinds of issues. But okay, I think Brzezinski during the 1990s was giving advice to the Clinton administration rather than giving advice to the Carter administration. He wasn't part of the Clinton administration, but uh, his voice was an influential one in that particular administration. And his grand chessboard book of 1997 was extremely influential among the neocons in the Clinton administration, okay, and also the neocons in the Bush administration going forward. Anyway, Brzezinski argued, going on with the article, that America and Keefe might potentially leverage ancient culture and linguistic complexities, as was done in Afghanistan, to form the hinge around which heartland power could be dissolved by denying Russia control of Ukraine. Quote, okay, this is a quote from Zibig, absent Ukraine, Russia would never become the heartland power. But with Ukraine, Russia can and would be a heartland power, he insisted. Russia needed to be enmeshed in a similar Ukrainian cultural identity quagmire, he advocated. Well, before we go on with that thought, it's important here to notice that if there is a peace settlement before Russia completely uh, makes the whole of Ukraine a conquest, uh, okay, it's pretty clear that Russia has already become a heartland power, okay, even now. And if there is a peace agreement that stops with a part of Ukraine, a big part of Ukraine, maybe over half of Ukraine as a rump state, okay, then Russia will not have that part, okay, of Ukraine, but it will have the eastern part, okay, of Ukraine, and perhaps also Kharkov, okay, and Odessa. And I think that would certainly be enough to add to its status as a heartland power, which I believe, okay, it already has. Because of its very vigorous movement of the Russian Federation into Central Asia, okay, and into East Asia. I think for that reason it's already a heartland power. But certainly the conquest of part of Ukraine is going to increase its status in that respect. Going on with the article, why was this policy decision so damaging to the prospects of ultimate peace between the US and Russia? It was because Kiev, egged on by the CIA, promoted the entirely false identitarian claim that, quote, Europe ends at Ukraine, unquote, and that beyond it lie, quote, the Slavs, unquote. This manipulation alone allowed Kiev to morph into an icon of total cultural identity war on Russia, despite the fact that the Ukrainian language, correctly known as Ruthenian, is not a Germanic language, nor is there any Viking Germanic DNA to be found among modern day Western Ukrainians. That's an interesting observation, particularly for me, because my ancestors, some of my ancestors, uh, um, came from the Ruthenian, the area of Ruthenia in the western part, okay, of Ukraine, uh, close to the Carpathian Mountains. So that's of interest to me because they probably spoke that particular language. Uh, it's good to know that there wasn't any Viking DNA to be found among. In its desire to support Kiev and to please Biden, the EU jumped at this Ukrainian strategic revisionism. Quote, Ukraine, unquote, crafted as European values, quote unquote, defending against, quote, Russian, unquote, Asian values. Yeah, Russia uh, uh, was sort of assigned to Asia by Zbig, even though, of course, I think many of the Russians consider themselves to be completely European and fully European, even though now, having been rejected by Europe, they're turning to Asia for uh, their major alliances. Of course, probably 80% of Russia, 85% of Russia is in Asia rather than in Europe. Okay, but Moscow was always considered as a European city. St. Petersburg, of course, was always considered as a European city, and I think a good part of the population of Russia has considered themselves as European. But going on, so is quote sustainable peace with Russia popular? Were it to be attempted in terms of seeking to sustain a rump Ukraine as a bellicose isthmus of, quote, Europe and its values, unquote, ranged against the, quote, regressive Slav sphere, unquote, then peace is not possible, says Alistair, for its underpinning premise would be wholly fake and would assuredly lead to renewed conflict in the future. Moscow almost certainly would reject such a deal, yet there is growing anxiety amongst the American public that the war in Ukraine seems locked into forever escalation, with palpable public fears that Biden and the hawks, quote unquote, in Congress are taking the U.S. towards a, quote, nuclear holocaust, unquote. Are we, humanity, to continue teetering at the brink of annihilation if a Trump, quote, deal, unquote, narrowly confined to Ukraine is refused in Moscow? The urgency to halt the slide towards escalation is clear, yet the space for political maneuver continuously shrinks as the compulsion of the Washington-Brussels hawks to land a fatal strike on Russia is not spent. But seen from the perspective of Team Trump, the task of negotiating with Putin is anything but straightforward. The Western public simply has never been psychologically conditioned to expect the possibility of a stronger Russia emerging. On the contrary, they have endured Western, quote, experts, unquote, sneering at the Russian military, denigrating the Russian leadership as incompetent, and its leadership being presented on their TVs as purely evil. Bearing in mind Brzezinski's seminal contribution on democracy and its later, quote, concentrate, unquote, in an elite techno-managed, quote, identitarian sphere, it is not difficult to see how a country as fragmented as America finds itself back-footed as the world slips towards a culturally based multipolarity. Of course, it's not exactly true to say that America has no communal culture, given the wide diversity of immigrant cultures in the U.S., but it is true that what is seen as traditional culture has been under siege. This, after all, was the crux of the recent presidential election and of elections in many other nations. The notion that once the Trump envoys have been initially to Moscow and gone away empty-handed, that Trump will sweep in to conclude an Ukraine deal does not reflect what Moscow has been endlessly highlighting. What is required is a, quote, big picture, unquote, treaty-based deal that settles the security architecture and frontiers between Heartland and the Rimland security interests. The Rimland, of course, in this case, is what we recognize as, as most of Europe, and the Heartland is the rest of Europe, okay, and all of Asia. But will such a deal be seen? Also, the Rimland, of course, includes North America and the UK. But will such a deal be seen by many Americans as weakness, as conceding U.S., quote, leadership, unquote, and, quote, greatness, unquote? Of course, it will be perceived that way because Trump would be effectively sealing America's defeat and repositioning the United States as one state amongst equals in a new concert of powers, i.e., in a multipolar world. The concert of powers, of course, was the group of allied powers that presided over the peace of the 19th century from 1815 to 1914, when the concert of powers broke up due to the outbreak of World War I. It is a big, quote, ask, unquote, can Trump do it, swallow American pride? One viable way forward would be to return to the original Gordian knot and to untie it, i.e., to untie the knot of there being no post-World War II written treaty, delimiting NATO's ever forward type of movement, and by so doing, ending the presence that NATO's displacement to wheresoever it chooses is no one's business but its own. Unfortunately, the other way to balance, unquote, the appearance of American and NATO defeat over Ukraine might be seen by Trump's hawkish advisors to be to pulverize Iran as a signal of American virility, quote unquote. Imagine that. I think it's going to be tough to pulverize Iran. I really do. Okay. Anyway, negotiations in the final instance are about interests and the noose, NOUS, to solve the riddle of two parties perceiving how, quote, the other, unquote, sees itself being perceived as weakness or a strength. Trump, if stumped in a literal impasse over Ukraine, might simply escalate the metaphysical staircase to simply say that he alone has the vision to save America from World War III, to save America from itself. And how does he do that? Of course, he does it by accepting the idea and by trumpeting the idea and by defending the idea that what America really needs to do is to reposition itself as one state amongst equals in a new concert of powers, i.e., in a multipolar world. And so that's the germ of the idea that we proceed with uh, for the rest of our program here tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and we'll check your comments, and then we'll move on with Dee's treatment of Scott Ritter's piece. So let's go to the comments. Okay, did you share to FB and Twitter? Okay, I believe that he is shared to Twitter. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I shared, yeah, because yours came on live on Twitter. And then I went and, shared it a couple of times with different
Okay.
hashtags and stuff.
Okay.
And
Thank you for reminding me.
yes. Yeah, that was good that Lana reminded you to make sure you shared.
That she reminded me because I did not share it to Facebook, and that's always very important for me.
Yeah, I shared it around in different groups on Facebook.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dee.
And we'll just see how it does.
We'll see how we do as we go forward tonight. Lana says, every time I see Slav, I remember that's where the word slave comes from. Is that really where the word slave comes from? Wasn't sure of that. Wasn't the first ruler of Russia Scandinavian? Yes. He was a Viking prince by the name, of Rurik, and he was the founder of his dynasty, the Rurik dynasty, uh, which eventually the princes of that particular dynasty actually became the rulers, of Moscow. A few centuries later, the rulers, of Muscovy, I should say, because that was what it was called, the Principality, of Muscovy, and that, of course, became the dominant state. That was the central state, that unified the whole, of Russia. But the first state was actually, in the Novgorod area. Okay, and then the Rurik dynasty moved to Kiev, and usually Kiev, is recognized as the first truly Russian state. Kievan Rus, it was called. And that was, if I recall my history correctly, in the 9th century AD. So it goes back to the 9th century, considerably older than the United States. But that was a Slavic state that had been conquered by the Vikings. because the princes of the Rurik dynasty, okay, were Vikings. They came down the rivers and they conquered a number of cities, okay, in Russia. Pierre Hani Samir asks, what's the situation in California now? I think the fires are still not completely contained. They're burning, okay, in various areas. My daughter lives, okay, in Burbank. We've been in close touch with her. And okay, the winds had died down where she is, and she is safe. But of course, it's been a disaster for that area, and many people are not safe. I see that, but Stephen Wolfbrand is not here tonight, and I wonder if Steve is safe because he lived inside of L.A., but proper himself, and I don't know that his area was safe. But if he doesn't show up tonight, I'm going to check on him. Evelita says, didn't Trump say not interested in engaging us in foreign wars, but rather exert pressure, i.e. influence in our region? He has said that. But the question is, will he follow through with that? Because all the people that he's hired for foreign policy work so far, except for Tulsi Gabbard, are certainly interested in foreign wars. And many of those people, okay, are anti-Russian and anti-communist. Certainly, this guy Mike Waltz is coming out of the House. Sebastian Gorka, okay, is another one who is, okay, and Marco Rubio, Rubio, I should say, is certainly an aggressive kind, okay, of neocon, and he is the guy that Trump is nominating for Secretary of State. I think that's a terrible appointment for Secretary of State. And Peter Hegseth, okay, is Secretary of Defense. He's not a neocon in the old mode, but he is a strange sort, okay, of Zionist, as well as being supremely unqualified to be Secretary of Defense. On the other hand, Colonel MacGregor would make a very good Secretary of Defense. And we haven't heard of any activities by the coming administration in his direction, in spite of the fact that he was an advisor to the Pentagon, in the original Trump administration. To say something else about who might be appointed, okay, to what, just the other day, there was a tweet from Trump on Truth Social, where he posted part of a speech by Jeffrey Sachs that was given at Cambridge. In the particular segment of that speech, there was very harsh criticism of Netanyahu by Jeff Sachs. Of course, it was very, very well based, but is characterized by some others as abusing Netanyahu, because Jeff Sachs spoke of him in that speech as I think I'm quoting correctly now, as a deep, dark son of a bitch. I don't consider that to be abuse, okay, of Netanyahu. I consider that to be the God's honest truth. So I think it's important to note that. Evelina says also Canada, okay, and Latin America. Yes, I agree. And of course, in the Trump administration, he was very aggressive in Latin America, especially with respect to Venezuela. And uh, I don't know if I expect him to change policies with respect to Venezuela, but there's no question that Trump's ideas to withdraw from Europe, okay, to focus on the Pacific because he appears to be very concerned about China, though I'm thinking he might withdraw from that actually pretty soon when he gets realistic about the balance of power, okay, in Asia. But he does seem to be bent on dominating, okay, in Latin America. So I think there's going to be trouble there. Uh, anyway, that covers our comments. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dee. Would you like me to post the Scott Ritter piece, or do you have that up
Yeah,
your?
please do.
Okay, I will present that, and then you can go through it. Okay, Dee, take it away.
Okay. Trump versus the establishment. That's something all the presidents have to do. They have to face the establishment.
Yes.
President Trump and former NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg at the 2017 NATO summit.
Yes, I would say off his record, there are few people in the area, okay, of international relations who are as stupid as Jens Stoltenberg. Okay, Dee, please go ahead.
Okay, Donald Trump enters 2025 with a perceived mandate for change and a doctrine predicated on the mantra, quote, peace through strength. Perhaps the biggest change sought by Trump is to divorce the United States from its Cold War era marriage to a transatlantic military alliance, NATO, that lack any present day purpose other than to stimulate an atmosphere of confrontation with Russia. The question remains as to whether Trump's mandate is strong enough to bring about the divorce, and whether the precepts of, quote, peace will begin out over those of strength if this mandate is challenged at home and abroad. Donald Trump is a man on a mission. He is also a man driven by ego, which may outstrip the ability of the nation he will be sworn in to lead on January 20th, 2025 to match. Trump simultaneously seeks to disengage the United States from global hotspots that have come to define present day national security priorities, while promoting a new foreign policy centered on solidifying American dominance over its immediate sphere of strategic interest, including taking an aggressive stance on expanding the territory of the United States to include Greenland and the Panama Canal.
Yes.
To accomplish this expansive goal, Trump and his foreign policy national security team will need to go against the grain of decades of political imperative that have over time been used to define U.S. national security interest. In seeking to bring an end to the Ukraine conflict without accomplishing the underlying goals of the U.S. and its Western allies, namely the strategic defeat of Russia, Trump is opening the door for the potential normalization of relations between Russia and the U.S. and, by extension, Russia and Europe.
Which,
And
by the way, would be a wonderful thing for Germany. They could get back their pipeline.
yeah, the new person that's running there with the AFD party um, was saying the woman that got nominated. She's saying that she wants to open up the pipeline if she gets elected.
Yes, I understand that is true. but she has yet to win. Right?
That's it. And you've got the opposing factions are doing everything, of course, for her
Yes,
not to.
to try to stop her.
Yes. This is a two-step process. First and foremost, Trump must find a formulation for conflict cessation which simultaneously recognizes the reality of Russia's victory over the collective West. This means that Russia will need to get the vast majority of what it is seeking when it comes to the Ukraine conflict. Ukrainian neutrality, no NATO membership. Okay, permanent international recognition of Russian sovereignty over Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk. The lifting of all sanctions linked to the military operation and political control over the future of what remains of Ukraine, including constitutional changes requiring, quote, denazification. And I saw you highlighted that.
I highlighted that. It does seem to me that one of the Russian goals isn't actually mentioned there, but is implicit. And that goal is the demilitarization, okay, of Ukraine,
Yes.
in which the Russians have always emphasized as one of their three main goals: demilitarization, denazification, and also neutralization of Russia.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, of Ukraine.
Right. And this thing with NATO, there's no purpose in having NATO around anymore anyway.
I agree. There's no purpose at all. The purpose is gone when Russia ceased to become an aggressive power interested in conquering the rest of Europe. Okay, right now, Russia has no interest in conquering Europe, okay, at all. All it wants to do is secure, okay, its borders so that it doesn't have a group okay, of aggressive Western nations on its borders full of missiles aimed at Russia.
Right. And when it comes to being the aggressor in any situations, the U.S. is the problem around the world.
It is. It is rather than Russia.
Trump will promote such a deal as a major victory, since he has cast himself as someone who did not promote this conflict, and as such should be credited with creating the conditions for peace. The next step,
That is another very important thing that for Scott to point out. Uh, I don't know whether Trump will promote such a deal, okay, as a major victory, but I certainly think he can promote it, okay, as a major victory, since he did nothing to promote this particular conflict. Uh, and of course, if he plays the peacemaker, that is a creditable role that he should be able to sell to the American people.
yes, the next step is perhaps the most challenging: divorcing the United States from NATO. The Ukraine conflict has underscored the reality that post-Cold War NATO is an organization lacking in a viable mission. What was once a defensive alliance focused on protecting Western Europe from Soviet expansion, NATO has become little more than a tool of the very kind of US-led foreign adventurism Donald Trump claims he is seeking to walk away from. The public, the rub. The rub is that the political and economic elite of Europe, who are responsible for NATO allowing itself to be redefined as a tool of an American empire, will not willingly yield to Trump's strategic vision. NATO, facing the diminishment of U.S. investment into the alliance, will seek to restructure The defenses of Europe predicated on the very threat model Trump, through his peace initiative regarding Ukraine, seeks to dismantle.
Yes, I think that could be correct. Certainly, the tendency will be there for the elites, okay, of NATO uh, to try to restructure defenses of Europe predicated on that particular threat model. But I also think that with the regimes changing in Europe, with the regime in France on the ropes, with the regime in Germany about to change, with some of the other nations, um, um, being unstable, okay, in their politics, we could see a wholesale change in the rulers of the nations of Europe, and therefore a strong desire to see the end of NATO and simply to get out of NATO. And if Putin makes some peaceful statements, and if he makes peace, okay, with Trump, and then he is only friendly towards Europe and just wants to open things up, okay, I think the Europeans will see that the rationale for NATO, okay, is no longer there. And even though some of the elites will seek to restructure the defenses of Europe, I think there's a paradox, okay, involved here. I don't know if I'd call it paradox exactly, but okay, consider, okay, that NATO is one aspect of the unification of Europe. The other aspect, is the EU. But let's say the NATO elites want to continue NATO in some way, that they want to create a situation where they still consider Russia to be a threat and they want to rearm themselves. If they stick to the EU, they won't be able to rearm themselves. Okay? The reason for that is that the individual nations of Europe that are part of the EU are not currency sovereigns. They cannot issue uh, their own currency. So they don't have the flexibility to finance, okay, a restructuring of the defenses of Europe. In other words, they have no capacity to build uh, expansive sorts of military alliances, uh, uh, simply because they cannot run the large deficits, that would make that necessary. Now, if they were to get out of the EU, then paradoxically, they would have the flexibility to finance, a rearmament program, okay, if they so desire. If we look at it from the standpoint of the populations of the major powers of Europe, of the population of the UK, roughly 70 million. Population of Germany, 85 million. The population of France, roughly 66 million. The population of Italy is also roughly 60 million or 66 million or something like that. Those four major powers of Europe, taken together, have a much larger population than Russia by itself. Population of Russia, okay, is 150 million. So theoretically, they could build a military that was just as powerful as the Russian military, and competitive also with our military as well. But the question is, if they stay in the EU, where are they going to get the money to do that?
Hmm.
Because the individual nations, except for England, okay, are not in a position to produce their own currency, and therefore to run the large financial deficits that would be necessary to build up uh, the military machines that they would have to build up to compete with Russia. So paradoxically, if they have a desire to continue inside of the EU, they're going to have to accept the peace that Russia is going to offer them. And there will be an incentive to do that because they don't have much of an appetite to spend 5% of their GDP or 6% of their GDP or 7% of their GDP on rearmament. Without our financial support, uh, uh, the nations of NATO don't have the financial wherewithal to do that. Anyway, I wanted to make that point. You still there, D?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, I pulled that up because there's an advertisement, right in the middle of this.
Okay.
Scott Ritter, K and Anya K, publicizing their book. Uh, they wrote a book on Ukraine, based on the interviews that Anya K did with Scott Ritter,
Mm-hmm.
and they're publicizing the book uh, 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 through events on January 15th in the Bronx, okay, in New York, which, by the way, is where Scott is originally from. I'm pretty sure he's a Bronx boy. Uh, I identify with that because I'm a Bronx boy too. And then on January 19th in Washington, D.C., and on January 21st in Poughkeepsie, New York. Okay, a little bit upstate from the city. Uh, so these are three events which will involve dinner, discussion, and book signing, and there are tickets info there. And after that, the article continues. So please go on, Dee.
Okay. Europe, however, is not able to bear the financial burden of such an undertaking, and any effort to build a massive new European military designed to confront a manufactured Russian threat will be necessity require the reallocation of limited fiscal resources away from the kind of social infrastructural investments the bulk of the European population are demanding from their government, making an effort to do so the equivalent of political suicide.
Right.
But
Okay. So there it is again. Okay. The point I made. As long as they're a part of the EU, their fiscal resources are going to be limited.
yes, and there's a major problem already with the social programs and the European Union trying to pull the people away from the social programs that they're used to.
Yes, there is a major. Uh, that's a major problem. We also ought to mention, though, that if the AFD does take over the government, okay, of Germany, the AFD has said it's going to withdraw from the EU,
Interesting.
and if it withdraws from the EU, that's going to mean that it's going to reacquire currency sovereignty.
And that's important.
And that's important, but it also makes possible the rearmament, okay, of Germany, which, of course, since World War II, it's been the policy of the United States to try at all costs uh, 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 to stop, okay, the rearmament of Germany, at least the full rearmament of Germany. And of course, it's been a major policy goal of Russia also to prevent, any rearmament of Germany. Okay, so
Okay.
that's kind of interesting because we probably would have. I don't know if he would have the same kind of rearmament to Germany if Russia and Germany remain friendly, as they were for much of their history, actually. Then there probably will be no need for Germany to rearm.
Right. Germany has so many issues right now, and the only way they're going to be able to get themselves together basically is to get back on their own currency.
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. But if they get back on their own currency, it will help them to do that. And
Hmm.
by the way, that will help them. It'll be a great assistance to them to shift away from fossil fuels and to go to alternative sources of energy because they'll be able to accelerate the transition because they'll be able to run fiscal deficits again.
Trump's goal is to make NATO politically and economically unsustainable. To do this, he must get Europe to acquiesce to a vision that reverses decades of policy predicated upon Russia as an existential threat, as well as getting congressional support for divorcing the United States from a transatlantic alliance that has served as the core of American national security policy for 80 years. It is unlikely that Europe will go gently into the
Okay, into that good night. I'm sorry.
into that good night. I was going to say I was going to go away into the sunset or something.
Okay, yeah, that's a line lifted from Dylan Thomas's poem.
Mm,
Do not go gently into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. But as long as we're talking about that, we also have to note that it may also be unlikely that the United States will go gently into that particular good night. In other words, I think it's true that Trump is not going to have an easy time in getting Europe to go that way, but he's also going to have to move the media here in the United States to a new vision of national security, which is not at all dependent on the transatlantic alliance.
exactly.
And that is not going to be easy for him to do because the mainstream media is probably going to resist that as part of their general opposition to Trump and Trumpism. So I think we're going to see a big fight here in this country over that. And I don't know what Trump is going to do about that.
I
But
mean, he'll have his typical stations like Fox and different stations and broadcasters and independent media that are typically with him will most likely go along with, his viewpoint.
I'm not sure Fox is going to do that because Fox has been wedded, I think, very closely to the conventional view, uh, to kind of an aggressive conventional view, with respect to Russia, with respect to generalized aggression. Uh, they're going to have to change uh, um, uh, their worldview also. I don't know if that's going to be an easy thing for them to do. Of course, they're going to want to move with Trump,
Hmm.
but the question is, can he persuade them? And they're going to get very vicious opposition from CNN, okay, and from MSNBC certainly,
Yes.
and probably from some of the alternative media as well, because many of the people in the alternative media may be wedded to Europe as well. So I don't know how well people like uh, uh, Crystal and Sager, Crystal and Kyle. I don't know how well people like that are going to accept to shift away from Europe, to a kind of America-centric view. Uh, I'm sure they'll like the part about ending the war in Russia, but I don't know whether they'll like the part of leaving Europe very well. I guess all that remains to be seen. But anyway, please go on.
Okay. Instead, there will be a period of political and economic turmoil as deeply entrenched elites seek to retain their positions of power and influence in the face of unyielding geopolitical reality that dictates otherwise. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, traditionally the core of what constitutes European political, economic, and military power, are all in on what appears to be irreversible decline, generating domestic political fallout that will untimely prove fatal to the current ruling class. One of the largest obstacles Trump faces is trying to oversee what amounts to the euthanasia of post war European power structures comes not from the European continent, which, frankly speaking, is virtually powerless to prevent such an outcome in the face of American indifference, manifesting itself in a refusal to underwrite the cost associated with sustaining the NATO alliance. Rather, Trump will face pushback from within the halls of Congress.
You betcha.
Here, decades of a symbiotic relationship between those who control the power of the purse and those responsible for defending the nation have produced a war based economy that feeds upon conflicts promoted by elected officials whose positions are dependent upon the support of the warmongering class.
Very well stated, right?
Yes, it is. And there you go, the Wall Street stocks and everything else.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everybody's involved with that stuff.
Yeah. This is precisely the threat to American democracy that President Dwight Eisenhower warned of in his farewell address to the nation in January 1961. Trump gave voice to this threat in a video statement released on March 17, 2023. Quote, "Our foreign policy establishment," Trump declared, "keeps trying to pull the world into conflict with a nuclear armed Russia based on the lie that Russia represents our greatest threat. But the greatest threat to Western civilization today," Trump noted, "is not Russia. It's probably more than anything else ourselves and some of the horrible U.S. hating people that represent us."
Okay, so I'm not sure that I agree with him that it's about some of the USA hating people that representing us. Okay, I'm not sure that the people involved are hating the other people of the United States. I think, though, they're caught in a web, and I agree with Trump uh, that the greatest threat to Western civilization today is probably ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, and certainly the people who represent us who've been bought off by uh, the extremely rich people and the large corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they may be the U.S. hating people, but I'm not sure the Congress people, okay, are U.S. hating as much as they are people who have been bought.
Right, they've been bought.
Yeah.
Trump pledged, quote, "a complete commitment to dismantling the entire globalist neocon establishment that is perpetually dragging us into endless wars, pretending to fight for freedom and democracy abroad, while they turn us into a third world country and a third world dictatorship right here at home."
Okay. Now, I think Trump was right on with that. I mean, and right on with some of the other statements also, but I don't know that he's going to follow through with this kind of thinking.
Exactly. That's the the thing with Trump. You don't know.
Yes, you just don't know because he seems pretty incoherent in terms of his ability to actually follow a coherent line of policy and to implement that coherent line of policy. Please go on.
Trump added that NATO's role needs to be re-explored and the State Department, quote, defense bureaucracy and intelligence services must likewise be overhauled.
Yes, I certainly agree with that too.
Trump accused this, quote, establishment of wanting to, quote, squander all of America's strength, blood, and treasure, chasing monsters and phantoms overseas while keeping us
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
distracted from the havoc they're creating here at home. These forces, Trump concluded, are doing more damage to America than Russia and China could ever have dreamed.
And he's right on about
That is true.
he's right on about that too.
The stakes in this game of political dominance are as high as they can get. Left unchecked, the quote establishment could very well lead the United States down the path of inevitable nuclear conflict with Russia.
This is the path that the Biden administration has been leading us down.
Yes, they have.
I mean, this is what has been going on. And it's not over yet. We still have 9 days to go. We don't know what's going to happen in that particular 9 days.
No, we don't.
I mean, I don't suppose anything drastic is going to be done as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned, but there might be something drastically done in West Asia, during these 9 days.
Mhm.
Anyway, please go on.
Trump has articulated a desire to take a different path. His mantra of, quote, peace through strength, however, is a double edged sword.
It's always been that way when it comes to
Mhm.
peace through strength.
As currently configured, Trump's strategic vision appears to seek to trade the loss of the post war transatlantic alliance that has defined American national security for 8 decades for peace and stability in Europe, for the assertion of a new Monroe Doctrine where the United States rules as the unquestioned power over not only the sovereign territory of the American homeland, but also America's neighbors to the north and south. Trump's gambit is predicated on Congress being willing to accept the proposed acquisition of Greenland and the declared reacquisition of the Panama Canal, as well as the promise of American dominance over the North and South American continents as a fair exchange for the loss of Europe. But Trump's gambit is also predicated on the fact that any massive restructuring of American geopolitical priorities will inevitably de-enfranchise existing power elites to the benefit of a new, quote, establishment elite. The deeply entrenched current elites will not yield the field without a fight.
Yes, I agree with all that. I do think, though, that uh, here's where the Marco Rubio appointment as Secretary of State may align with um, Trump's ideas, because I think that Marco Rubio's main area of interest is in North, and South America. Of course, that he's been generally part of the group that's nationalist in orientation, He's been aggressive in his notions, okay, of foreign policy, but I do think that he's a person who might accept the trade-off. That is the acquisition of Greenland and the reacquisition of the Panama Canal, as well as the promise of American dominance over North and South American continent as a fair exchange, okay, for the loss of Europe. I think he's someone who would accept that, and there may be some other people in Congress, who would accept that also, especially people in the Republican Party might accept that.
Hmm. Oops.
Okay, I think we're okay at moreover.
Okay. Moreover, the exchange Trump is proposing assumes that the United States can negotiate a smooth exit from Europe, void of any entanglements. One of the biggest hurdles in this regard is Trump's oversized ego and notoriously thin skin. Quote, peace through strength is as much about perception as it is about reality, and the concessions Trump will be compelled to make to Russia to bring the Ukraine conflict to a quick and decisive conclusion require at a minimum the appearance that what happens is all part of the Trump quote design. Russia has already thrown a wrench into the works by rejecting out of hand a peace proposal assembled by the Trump National Security Team in waiting, an outcome which most likely moved too
Sorry.
far. Proves fatal to Trump's stated objective of ending the Ukraine conflict on day one of his presidency, as if only it was that easy. The fact is, it may very well take between 6 months and a year after Trump is sworn in for the Ukraine conflict to wind down on terms acceptable to Russia. Trump would be well advised to engage with the Russians early and realistically to bring an end to the fighting in the shortest time frame possible. Only after that can he begin the process of divorcing the United States from the dysfunctional union it maintains with NATO. And, like any long term relationship, this divorce will take time, but the dissolution of NATO is all about assured once the Ukraine conflict is concluded. Trump can literally hand off the proceedings to his lawyers and get on with the courtship of his new conquest, Greater America, which of course brings a whole other meaning to the concept of Make America Great Again.
Yeah, I thought that was a great article by Scott.
Uh huh.
Very, very well put. Uh, I thought a very fine analysis, paying due attention to the psychology of Donald Trump, trying to give him advice about what to do, and how okay it might be possible to do it, but also focusing on the difficulties.
Right, because Greenland wants to remain the way it is. But what Greenland did say recently was they're willing to talk. For example, if the U.S., with military bases and have like kind of like a protection around Greenland, or act in that way, but they're still going to stay how they are.
Well, I think what Denmark said uh, after a while was that they recognized the right of Greenland to um, uh, 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 self determination.
Right.
In other words, to a plebiscite where they decide whether to stay with Denmark, okay, or not. So if they vote to leave Denmark, and become an independent country, uh, they then would be in a position, to negotiate with Trump, and he might be able to offer them uh, a good deal, Okay, and here again, the flexibility that we have due to the fact that we're monetary sovereign, uh, would allow him to make uh, uh, a pretty good deal with the Greenlanders, probably. Uh, okay, so he might actually succeed. Okay, in doing this. Now, Scott Ritter has been on some TV program. I'm sorry, some YouTube programs since he wrote this, where he has said that he'd be willing to bet that Trump will be successful in getting Greenland to become okay, I don't know what it might be called, okay, a Commonwealth of the United States or whatever. I don't think the population is large enough to make it a state. Okay, but they might well be amenable to a deal. Okay, so it may not be such a ridiculous idea, okay, as it initially seemed. Okay, and I think it might be more difficult to get the Panama Canal back. I'm not sure I see the need to get the Panama Canal back either. Okay, it just might be more realistic to build some high-speed rail uh, uh, going across the United States to the Pacific coast. I mean, a project like that, might be more practical and also more beneficial to the fiscal state of the United States to use high-speed rail to simply replace the role of the Panama Canal. Uh, I mean, I can see advantages to that kind of project.
You hear about the countries using it too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the idea of a land bridge, from the Atlantic to the Pacific is much more feasible these days than it once was. I mean, high-speed trains, you could probably reach, with new technologies, you could probably reach some high-speed rails speeds as high as 600 miles an hour. Making it a 5-hour trip across the United States. How many hours does it take to go through the Panama Canal? I mean, when the ships are lined up, it's quite a few hours, isn't
That's true.
it? Okay. So I think there are some advantages to that. So I'm not sure how practical that is to try to get it back. I'm not even sure that's the best way to go. But it's definitely part, okay, of the idea of focusing our power into this particular hemisphere that Trump is trying to push. So let's go to the comments and see what else we have here. We have a lot, okay, from Evelina. Evelina mentions Panama. Lana says, peace through strange. Is that a throwback from Reagan? I think it's from way before Reagan. I think we used to hear peace through strength going all the way back to Eisenhower, maybe. Uh, Certainly going back to Kennedy, or certainly going back to Nixon. It was sort of a mantra, but it's before Reagan, certainly. Evelina says, de-researched indigenous population in Greenland. I thought the Sami, uh, turns out, okay, they're into it. The same as Alaska. Yeah, I know they're into it. Yeah.
Hmm.
There was a treatment of their culture in one of Jared Diamond's books, okay, where he treated uh, the collapse of the Viking culture in Greenland, and he also talked about the Inuit culture in Greenland as well. Except that the Inuit in Greenland are an autonomous region. They are. Evelina says, so essentially he's promoting an invasion. For shame. He may not be promoting an invasion. He probably thinks he can make a deal. I mean, the population of Greenland is so small, he can probably make a pretty good deal. If it happens in two stages, if they declare, if they have a plebiscite and they vote for independence from Denmark, they would then be free to negotiate a deal with the United States or with other powers who might compete with the United States for that matter. Evelina says, new German candidate wants to reopen gas pipeline with Russia. Yes, I know. Evelina says, they're Inuit. Yes, they are. Evelina says, what Rubio wants deep down is Cuba. It's in his DNA. I know. I know he wants Cuba. Right. Absolutely. What his rotten little heart wants. Yeah. His rotten little heart is right. Okay, let's get to the third of our pieces, which I will take on. We covered this before, but it's very relevant here too. It's a piece by Colonel MacGregor. It's called Navigating the Fiscal Storm, a New Course for U.S. National Defense, by Douglas MacGregor. He wrote this on November 14th, 2024. He calls it a defense paper, Taming the Warfare State. And I'll go through it again here because it's very relevant. The United States is sailing through turbulent waters. The post-Cold War unipolar moment has passed. And the 21st century geopolitical landscape is shaped by sweeping social, political, and technological change. Our current defense policy, a relic from a bygone era, is an expensive and ill-fitting suit that no longer serves its purpose. The fiscal storm is upon us, and profound changes are needed to right the ship. Now, I don't agree with Doug that the fiscal storm is upon us, again, because we're a monetary sovereign and we can create as much fiscal power as we want here in the United States. Of course, we have to change some of the attitudes of the people in both the Republican and Democratic Party who continue to believe in fiscal myths. That's certainly true. But if you read any of my books, like Fiscal Myths of Campaign 2016, okay, or of course, Fixing the Debt, without breaking America, okay, or the two books I wrote on the activities in Washington by the Peterson Foundation, okay, and also the progressives who have the same point of view as the Peterson Foundation. There are all kinds of myths about our fiscal power. False myths, of course, they're myths, so they're false, which are running around. But those myths can be dispelled. If people are willing to listen, those myths can be dispelled in less than a week, and we can begin to do whatever we need to do to meet any fiscal storm that we might encounter. So there's no necessary fiscal storm. But there is a question of how we want to allocate our real resources for our own sake and for our sake of the rest of the world. Doug goes on, the defense elephant in the room. The realization that the United States is in fiscal freefall is beginning to sink in. Again, $100 trillion platinum coin would fix the fiscal freefall immediately. Okay. An economic crisis looms. And by the way, Trump can do that himself. He doesn't have to rely on the Congress. But Congress can also help if they're willing to pass overt congressional financing, which is 2 sentences in any money bill. An economic crisis looms, one that bailouts and quantitative easing cannot stop. Regardless of the circumstances, profound changes in defense structure, leadership, thinking are needed. These changes will inevitably evoke strong responses from Capitol Hill and the defense industry. The incoming president has 3 choices: allow service bureaucracies or external events to drive outcomes resulting in few or no savings. This is akin to letting the ship drift aimlessly at the mercy of the storm. It's not, unless you think that our fiscal resources are limited. If you accept the ideas, of MMT, then you can let the bureaucracies drift, because we do not need fiscal savings from them. We can make whatever adjustments to the defense status quo we have to make, and we can allow them to waste money for some time to come. All we have to do is be careful they don't get us involved in any wars, because that's not in our national interest. Not because we would spend too much at them, but because a lot of people are going to get killed who don't have to be killed. So, of course, we have to be careful not to kill people, because we allow these bureaucracies to aimlessly drift. So that's my comment on point 1. Point 2, make marginal adjustments to the defense status quo, avoiding conflicts but achieving little change and only modest savings. This is like rearranging the deck chairs on a Titanic. It won't save the ship. Well, again, he's still focused on the savings. We don't need to make marginal adjustments to the defense status quo. What we have to do is accept a multipolar world. And to do that, we have to make major adjustments to the defense status quo. We have to get rid of the defense status quo and create a new defense status quo of the kind that Doug is going to suggest here, and that we already saw being suggested by Scott Ritter in the previous article. 3, leverage the fiscal crisis to reduce overhead, streamline defense investment, and reset the force structure, increasing capability and promising major savings. This is the bold course correction needed to navigate the storm safely. So again, I don't think there's a fiscal storm coming, but there is, shall we call it, a national interest storm coming, because the conventional wisdom that's governing our foreign policy has goals that are completely misplaced, that are going to get us into wars, that are going to get us into defeats, and that are simply going to prevent our migrating to a collaborative and rational foreign policy that will bring us to terms with the rest of the world, including the global South. Doug says, this paper argues for the 3rd choice: leverage change to build new, better forces for the 21st century, and allowing for deep spending cuts of 400 to 500 billion. We need those defense spending cuts, not because we need to have the money, but because we are spending on things that are negative. The outcome of the military things we are spending on is wars in faraway places. The outcome is blocks to the evolution of the world to a multipolar world where people predominantly live in peace. That's why we have to have the spending cuts, not because we don't have the money. This approach enhances the U.S. military's competitive advantage in future warfare and improves American national security by ending open-ended interventions without attainable political military objectives. That's really the key point. This approach enhances the U.S. military's competitive advantage in future warfare and improves American national security by ending open-ended interventions without attainable political military objectives. That's the problem with our current approach. It isn't that we spend too much, though we do spend too much because we're spending on the wrong things. It's not that it's too much, it's because it's spending on the wrong things. Assuming Congress acts wisely, the resulting annualized savings will pay down the national debt. No, we don't want to pay down, the national debt by running surpluses. That's going to be bad for the economy. We must continue to have deficits, healthy deficits in our economy, because we have to compensate for savings that drain the economy of resources that it needs to transact business, and also because there are leakages to foreign trade, and we need to run deficit in order to compensate for the leakages to foreign trade. So we may want to pay down, the national debt, because the national debt is a false issue that people tend to organize around to say that we should not have deficits. We should have deficits. For political reasons, we should also pay down, the national debt. The $100 trillion coin or overt congressional financing will do both. In other words, will allow us to run deficits and to pay down, the national debt. Now, why do we to run deficits? Because always remember the following. When the federal government deficit spends, it leaves net financial assets in the non-government sector. And we want net financial assets in the non-government sector to grow because we have a growing society, a growing population, growing needs. So we want government contributions that increase net financial assets in the private sector. Of course, we want to ensure that those net financial assets are properly allocated to the real needs of the people and not simply sent to the rich, who will only take them away from the economy because they will leak them to savings. So giving them to the rich is counterproductive. There's no trickle down. There's a trickle away into savings. It doesn't trickle down. Trickle down is false. But if the government allocates these deficits to the needs of our population, then the deficits will be good for us all. We can also pay down, the national debt, because whenever the components of the national debt fall due, the proceeds from the $100 trillion coin can pay them off. Obviously, our national debt is now at $36 trillion. If we minted a $100 trillion coin and we didn't issue any more debt, we would still have $64 trillion left to cover deficits, and we could pay off the whole national debt as it falls due over 30 years. Anyway, grand strategy and new thinking. This is what Doug says. Grand strategy, if it exists at all, consists of avoiding conflict, not starting wars. And I completely agree with both Scott and Doug about this. New thinking in defense and foreign policy prioritizes diplomacy and peaceful cooperation over military power, tipping the hat to Jeffrey Sachs in this respect, prioritizing diplomacy and peaceful cooperation. Doug agrees with Jeffrey Sachs. If Trump appointed Jeffrey Sachs as his Secretary of State and Doug as his Secretary of Defense, there would be peace and harmony, within the government, and there wouldn't be a drive to dominate all kinds of people everywhere, not even people in Latin America.
We should send all this stuff to Trump.
Bonnie says, let's sell all this stuff to Trump. Yeah. None of America's potential opponents, except those with nuclear weapons, pose a direct threat to the American homeland. Absolutely true. Either nuclear weapons or the Oreshnik. If international terrorism and criminality remain threats, then border security and tightly controlled immigration should be the top priority in national security. So this is Doug's nod to the Republican Party and their main issue: tight border security and controlled immigration. But of course, if you want to control immigration, the best thing we could do to stop the flow of immigration to the United States is build up the economies of Latin American nations. So Latin Americans will have reasons to stay home and not to come here. When are we going to get that through our thick skulls? Senior military leaders and their services cannot be expected to reform themselves and fundamentally change the military status quo. A World War II Cold War structure that is expensive, single service focused, and vulnerable to weapons of mass destruction. Peter Drucker, when asked how to change a large business enterprise, answered, quote, "If you want something new, you must stop doing something old. People in any organization are always attached to the obsolete," unquote. Truer words were never spoken. In line with Drucker's guidance, the incoming president must implement a new national military strategy that diverges sharply from the last 30 years. This is what Scott was talking about too. And this is what Alistair Crooke was hinting at. This strategy must scale back America's forward presence, absolutely, mandate adaptation to new forms of warfare, and address the requirement to retain and develop America's best human capital in uniform. Completely agree with that. Toward a new national military strategy for real and meaningful reductions in the current $1 trillion national defense budget to occur. National command authorities must alter the nation's strategic focus. New national security legislation must move the posture of U.S. forces away from military interventions focused on nation building, democratization, or alleged threats. Instead, the defense posture should focus on the Western Hemisphere, learning to avoid patterns of behavior antithetical to U.S. interests, like, for example, screwing Venezuela. That is not in line with the United States interests. What do we want from poor Venezuela? I mean, what is that crap all about?
I know it's ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. I mean, what do we want from poor Cuba? I mean, this has all been insanity.
Definitely, definite.
Why are we always overthrowing the governments of Latin America? I mean, we always put them in the hands of right-wing fascists. How is that in the interest of the United States? It is not. The following 5 points offer the foundation for a new national military strategy that is both affordable and sustainable within the new multipolar international system of the 21st century. Here, I don't worry about the affordability, but I worry about the sustainability in the sense of climate and environmental sustainability, resource case sustainability. I don't worry about the fiscal sustainability because the United States is a monetary sovereign, and with monetary sovereigns, fiscal sustainability is never an issue. And by the way, I have the URL fiscalsustainability.com for sale. It can go for a song, that is to say, only $45,000 for that wonderful URL. Anyway, that's a sorry, I diverted attention a little bit. Defend America first. Bonnie's laughing. Defend America first. Reserve the use of American military power for defense of the United States and the Western Hemisphere. Secure U.S. borders, coastal waters, and airspace. Military power may be used to defend American citizens in identified vital strategic interests at home and abroad. However, unless the United States' vital strategic interests or territory are directly attacked, Washington will avoid the use of force. This, folks, is wisdom. Maintain strategic military power. Ensure U.S. freedom of action in areas of strategic importance by preserving and enhancing the American military's core capabilities. Identify, defend, and maintain critical lines of communication and a reduced number of overseas bases needed for the execution of these tasks. In other words, get rid of how many bases are there? 859? I don't know the exact number. It's on that order. He's saying close down the 859 bases and bring the people home and maybe have a few bases here in the Western Hemisphere somewhere. But, maybe have a military base in Greenland for some reason. I don't know. I don't know about those matters are open for debate. My own view is the fewer overseas military bases we have, the better. Quote, declare a no first use doctrine for nuclear weapons. We used to have that doctrine. That was Kennedy's doctrine. Maintain the scientific industrial capacity to wage high-end conventional warfare and build on nuclear weapons, but recognize that the alleged advantage of striking first with nuclear weapons is illusory. Preventive or preemptive war is unwise and immoral and should be excluded from American military strategic planning. Establish an operational national defense staff. Develop, update, and implement a refined, unified command plan to dramatically reduce unneeded overhead and improve the U.S. Armed Forces' responsiveness to national command authority. This action requires legislation to place a, quote, chief of defense, unquote, in the chain of command with real authority, not just advisory responsibility. I'm wondering whether Doug is bucking for chief of defense, kind of sitting above the Defense Department and other departments as well, and also the intelligence people. Build new armed forces for the 21st century. America needs a strong military designed to protect the United States in the 21st century, not an anachronistic and expensive industrial-age structure with enormous overhead and few fighters. Again, I couldn't agree more with that. Trends in force design, precision strike effects, kinetic and non-kinetic, using a vast array of weapons in all domains enabled by the rapid and timely dissemination of information through network intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance ISR capabilities point the way to a fundamental paradigm shift in 21st century warfare. Russian military success in a recent war between Russia and Ukraine owes much of its success to the integration of many factors. First, the mobilization of manpower, economic and industrial production. Second, the Russian production of key weapon systems rose dramatically after October 2022. Immediately after U.S. Commerce Secretary Raimondo told Congress that U.S. sanctions had reduced Russia to using semiconductors from, quote, dishwashers and refrigerators, unquote. Where did she get that crazy idea? For their weapons. Third, Russian weapon systems performed beyond Western expectation. Western weapons did not. Washington and its allies infused Ukrainian forces with equipment and technology on the scale of U.S. lend-lease to the Soviet Union during World War II, but the weapon systems and equipment could not outpace Russian performance. Finally, Russian commanders on the battlefield still had to direct their forces' tactics mattered, and the readiness of the Russian soldier to close with and destroy his opponent was critical to battlefield success. Russia's decision to conduct a strategic defense in depth reduced the sensor to shooter time to the point that operational strikes using cruise missiles, glide bombs, rocket artillery, and tactical ballistic missiles were directed by brigade commanders against targets in minutes. What emerged was an ISR strike complex that integrated maneuver and logistics across thousands of square miles to magnify the impact of the Russian military power. In this operational setting, the defense triumphed over the offense. Russian Integrated Air Defense Systems, IADS, shot down roughly 35,000 drones, 647 aircraft, all types, and 283 helicopters. Russia's tight integration of ISR with strike weapon systems, artillery, rockets, also missiles, and aircraft delivered bombs is responsible for 870,000 casualties of an estimated 1.8 plus million Ukrainian casualties. The numbers of Ukrainian dead probably exceed 600,000. Since Doug has written this, the estimates of Ukrainian dead have gone up to 1 million. Meanwhile, in less than 3 years of Congress, the Russian military sustained 120,000 casualties, including 75,000 soldiers killed in action. Open disbelief in the possibility that Russian ISR strike complex could defeat masses of armor and aircraft resulted in repeated battlefield failures, costing the lives of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. The point is that ISR and strike capabilities now shape mission areas that cut across all domains: land, sea, air, and space. Single service command structures are obsolete. U.S. capabilities must be integrated within the ISR strike complex at the operational level to detect, deter, disrupt, neutralize, or destroy opposing forces decisively. Much of the Ukrainian force that was destroyed resembled our force structures and equipment. This recognition demands a thorough analysis of our own forces, weapons, and employment norms from the standpoint of effectiveness and efficiency. After World War II, Eisenhower said, quote, "Separate ground, sea, and air warfare is gone forever," unquote. The time to translate Eisenhower's vision into reality is long overdue. Defense investments, commitments, and missions must be aligned with new forms of warfare that make traditional maneuvers on the battlefield extremely difficult, if not impossible. In other words, it's time to optimize today's forces within the trend line shown below to guide strategic investment acquisition over time. Aligning defense investments with the evolutionary trends alters the traditional defense paradigm. Optimizing capability at cost inside the post-industrial age structure dramatically increases the operational impact of each dollar spent. Failure to correct contemporary industrial age inefficiencies and duplications reduces operational impact and perpetuates unsustainable cost exchange of ratios with opponents, as seen in Ukraine. In sports, getting to the ball is not enough. Winning teams move to where the ball is going to be or where their players can pass the ball for a scoring shot. Teams win by identifying pattern in the game's evolution, patterns they can leverage. Patterns are not absolute, and adjustment to leverage the patterns is required on the way to victory. Warfare is similar. Hindsight tells us that machine guns and artillery would kill millions of unprotected infantrymen during World War I. But hindsight could have been foresight if viewed through the right lens. In Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, the author argues that corporations should create specialized autonomous organizations to exploit new technologies or risk squandering revolutionary capabilities inside status quo organizations. The special purpose organization designed to lead changes in defense is needed for the same purpose. I guess I'd introduce another thought here. Okay, would be that the specialized autonomous organizations, I wouldn't say to exploit new technologies. I would say to exploit new knowledge, including new technologies, or risk squandering revolutionary capabilities inside of status quo organizations. The special purpose organization designed to lead changes in defense is needed for the same purpose. For the military, that should be a knowledge management organization. That's the kind of autonomous organization that can exploit new knowledge or can lead to the exploitation of new knowledge. Persistent surveillance linked to modern strike weapon systems, including tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, rocket artillery, manned and unmanned systems of every kind, make the conduct of traditional amphibious, airborne, or air mobile operations impossible in anything but permissive environments. Moving large ground forces tracked or wheeled together with supporting logistical equipment, ammunition, food, and medical supplies with sea transport over the vast distances of the Pacific, Atlantic, or Indian Oceans is not viable in contested environments. Long-range precision strike from submersible, surface, or land-based platforms dominate the battle space. In other words, repeating any of these operations on the scale of World War II would be suicidal. The implications for ground forces, Army, and Marine are significant. Till these ground forces can find ways to cope with the strategic environment, they should be reduced in size and reorganized. The U.S. Army and Marine Corps missions must be reevaluated in the context of future needs and requirements. A modest amount of redundancy and capability can be helpful, but there is simply too much. It would make sense to shift most of the light infantry or motorized infantry missions to the Marines and shift high-end conventional warfare missions to the U.S. Army. In the meantime, Army end strength and Marine strength should be reduced to 430,000 and 120,000, respectively. The two services must be viewed as components of the larger ground force. Their roles and missions must be redefined by informed civilian leadership. I want to put this in some context here, these numbers. So Doug is advocating for ground forces of altogether 550,000. Now, this compares to what we had in World War II when we had 150 million people. We now have 340 million people in this country. In World War II, we had an army, I'm just estimating off the top of my head, 8 to 10 million people. We had 15 million people in uniform then. Maybe 10 million, were in the army. I should say we're in the ground forces altogether. 10 million versus 550,000. And with one half of the population. So that is a considerable reduction in ground forces. That's what Doug is calling for, at this point. Their roles and missions must be redefined by informed civilian leadership. You can tell that Doug believes in democracy as a core thing because, of course, he wants the civilians to run the military, not to change that. He's not for a man on horseback running the country. Thousands, of the Marines floating around the world are waiting for a crisis to break out is wasteful. We should retain the capability to conduct amphibious operations and to evacuate Americans worldwide. But self-labeling USMC as America's 9/11 force is a recipe to promote more relevance, funding, assets, and people that are not needed. Marines and soldiers already share equipment sets and train together in the Army school system and training centers. In the absence of a requirement to maintain large Marine forces in readiness to conduct amphibious operations, two services need to conduct thorough roles and mission reviews since they are likely to operate together in the future. Then he goes on to talk about the aviation and Navy, and the Marines, and the need for consolidation. And he talks about also the U.S. Navy confronting similar challenges. Fleets organized around large service combatants like modern aircraft carriers. And now easy to identify, target, disable, or sink. Submarines and unmanned submersibles are the foundation for American maritime dominance on the high seas, not a fleet on the Midway Jutland type of model. Submarines rule the waves, says Doug. And I think he's right. The incoming Secretary of Defense should direct the reduction of the Navy's surface fleet to 8 carrier battle groups and rebalance home porting in response to new national priorities. Combatant commanders should also be instructed to reevaluate, quote, a presence versus surge naval requirements given improved long-range precision strike and ISR capabilities with smart presence alternatives. Like the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army, the Navy and the Coast Guard are moving close together in terms of mission profile and required capabilities. It makes sense to incorporate the U.S. Coast Guard into the U.S. Navy. If blended seamlessly, the two complement and reinforce one another. Aerospace forces must also cope with new challenges. Integrated air and missile defenses are more capable now of identifying target forms regardless of aircraft or design. These developments suggest alterations in modernization and force design priorities. Hundreds of manned bombers on the B-21 model are not affordable. I think they are affordable because anything we need is affordable, but I don't think we need that. I don't think we need that. Having hundreds of those bombers is only going to be an incentive to use them when we shouldn't be using them. Alternative platform solutions that are less expensive but still capable of delivering ordnance at high altitude must be found. To this point, the F-35 has proved to be a delicate wallflower that cannot withstand the rigors of practically any operational environment. The future Secretary of the Air Force must address this problem. Clearly, the service secretaries will require flexibility to redirect any identified savings. Service secretaries will need to move money around to better align themselves with the new strategy. An example would involve reassigning embassy guards to light infantry formations or reinvesting savings into a future capability of infrastructure. The same applies to operational funding cuts. Nuclear weapons remain unchanging necessities for national defense until some new breakthrough in technology renders them obsolete. The problem Americans confront is a tendency to think about nuclear war within an emotional framework that is grounded in the past. The rising lethality of individual warheads and the capability to deliver multiple warheads within a single missile system suggests that matching the potential opponent's arsenal weapon for weapon makes no sense. Americans should design a nuclear force by determining what is required to make a first strike suicidal for any nuclear power. Then decide what is needed for that purpose to ensure launch reliability and national protection. Placing large numbers of nuclear weapons and warheads in the American Midwest, America's breadbasket, should be reconsidered or even replaced by placing more weapons at sea, reducing overhead. Today, senior military leaders and their forces are living within the organizational structure of the 1947 National Security Act, the paradigm for strategic military action rooted in the World War II experience. Reshaping the bloated warfare state to defend America first demands the elimination of wasteful and redundant single service overhead and support structures. This is not a new problem. Okay, and he goes on to talk about this in more detail. Oh, here it is. At the height of World War II, there are 12 million men in the United States Armed Forces. I think he's wrong about that figure. I think there were 15 million. But anyway, he says 7 four-star generals and admirals commanded them: Marshall, MacArthur, Eisenhower, Arnold, King, Nimitz, and Leahy. Those were the generals and admirals. That's all there were, 7. How many four-stars are there currently commanding America's armed forces? Answer: 43 four-star generals and admirals. He wants to get rid of all these four-star generals and admirals. All this is much better for the flexibility of the military, for its responsiveness, and much better from the standpoint of spending on it. You get rid of the spending, you get rid of the bureaucracies, you get rid of an establishment that has a vested interest in war. You want to reduce wars. You get rid of the institutions that are there for fighting wars. Doug is advocating here for a military that is lean and mean, and that is necessary for defense, but not greater in size, okay, than that. And it's also a military that's appropriate uh, to assist with a foreign policy of the kind that's being advocated by Scott Ritter and that Trump says that he is for. Doug is here talking about the kind of military that would serve a Trump foreign policy based on Trump's own statement about what uh, uh, he wants. He wants to take the 6 functional unified commands and reorganize them into 3 commands that Doug wants to do. I'm not going to continue with the rest of this. I've covered it actually before. That there's no need to go any further with it. Uh, there are some really good remarks here about historical stuff. Uh, but okay, I think the point is made. This is the kind of military that fits the kind of foreign policy that Trump and Scott Ritter, okay, are talking about. Uh, it's consistent with a better future for America. It's consistent with the evolution of the United States uh, from an unsustainable position as the hegemon, but to a position as a major power in a multipolar world. And that should be the evolution that we are focusing on now. To end this, I'm going to read Doug's conclusions. Compelling change in the U.S. national defense is tantamount to war. Bold new initiatives can succeed. Moving to the point of least resistance leads to failure and no change. There's no time to lose. Department of Defense is cannibalizing itself to meet operational demands, and in the process, we're getting older faster and destroying our most precious resource, human capital. Bold changes are necessary now. If the American people are ever to rectify the abysmal record of the American military in action in the last 3 decades, shrink, then replace the senior ranks. Change in organization and culture will not result in streamlined, unified military command structures and more fighting power without new senior military leadership. Modern warfare will demand much more than PowerPoint slides or dominating weak opponents with overwhelming firepower. During his presidency, Eisenhower's goal was to achieve both security and solvency. Well, we don't have to worry about the solvency right now, but we need to worry about the security. The developing fiscal crisis creates the opportunity for Washington to both economize and develop the nation's range of strategic options in military affairs. I don't agree, of course, there's a fiscal crisis. He also says, unfortunately, Washington's decisions since 1991 to employ military power were often made without an accurate and sobering self-assessment of America's strengths and its weaknesses. Without a new national strategy and senior military leaders in place, the senior leaders and armed forces will simply shrink existing forces until more money and people are provided to restore them to their original size. This is a dead end. Compared with the last war, the next war is frequently virgin territory. Given his experience during World War II, Eisenhower was very hard on the service parochialism, realizing that the service chiefs viewed themselves as first being accountable first and foremost to their own service. He insisted the service secretaries stand firmly behind the Eisenhower administration's defense programs, even though it might not fully meet any one service's desires. In 2025, new national leadership must provide the American people with solutions that are effective and sustainable. President Eisenhower's 1958 prescription is still a good guide for the future. The purpose is clear. It is safety with solvency. The country is entitled, to both. And the basis for that safety with solvency, and as I said again, I don't worry about the solvency, but the basis for the safety is no longer going abroad to seek monsters to destroy. We need to bring people home. We need to liquidate our bases. We need to forswear being the hegemon. We need to make peace with other powers all over the world. We need to accept the evolution of the multipolar world that we are seeing all over. We need to stop resisting that. And now that brings us to a consideration, okay, of more of your comments, if there are any more. So you predict a deal by Greenland, probably right, Joe. I wouldn't say I predict it. Scott Ritter predicts it. I don't necessarily predict it. Okay, I think it could happen. Okay, but okay, I don't really predict it. I think there are so many people who are going to oppose it for various reasons, a variety of reasons. There may be competition for Greenland. It may be Russia will want to buy Greenland. Maybe I don't know. Uh, there's a lot of great power competition going on in the Arctic. That is why Trump wants to acquire Greenland. Some of the other great powers probably also will want to acquire Greenland. I think the people of Greenland should probably make the decision as to who they want to join up with. Okay. If they want to exercise their, self-determination and not stay with Denmark, that seems to be fine with Denmark, so it's fine with me. If it's also fine with the people, okay, of Greenland. At that point, they should have a choice. I'm not predicting a deal. I hope that Trump doesn't get us into any trouble over making that kind of a deal. Anyway, let's get to the final article here, D. This is your territory.
Yes, it is.
Shall I bring it up for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. There we go. This is Pepe Escobar.
Excuse me. Empire of Chaos Reloaded.
Yeah,
Pepe Escobar. I like that title.
I love that title. It's wonderful. And there is the capital of the Empire of Chaos, right?
Yep. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The empire of chaos is relentless. Warfare, destabilizations, sanctions, kidnappings, color revolutions, false flags, annexations. 2025 will be the year of BRICS, plus BRICS partners as choice targets under fire.
I think that's a very important statement
Yes, it is.
and a prediction, okay, that is very important. Unless Trump totally changes our foreign policy very quickly, we're looking forward to all those things that are mentioned here by Pepe.
Exactly. If he looks at it, through a business, how it benefits us business-wise to be part of the world and working together. I mean, that's how, Trump has to look at it. Inestimable Professor Michael Hudson coined, quote, chaos as official U.S. policy. That's bipartisan, and it runs across all silos of the deep state. Yes, it does. It's all about chaos. In the absence of long-term strategic vision, and amidst the progressive imperial expulsion from Eurasia, all that's left for the hegemon is to unleash chaos from West Asia to Europe and part of Latin America, a concerted attempt to divide and rule BRICS and thwart their collective drive affirming sovereignty and the primacy of national interest. U.S. think tank had already floated a year and a half ago with the notion of swing states, not the parochial American electoral version, but its transposition to geopolitics. All 6 candidates at the time were BRICS members: Brazil, India, South Africa, or potential BRICS members or partners: Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. The code for, quote, swing states was unmistakable. All these are targets for destabilization, as in, if you do not abide by the, quote, rules-based international order, you're going down.
And by the way, what is the rule-based international order? No one knows. We don't even know because we can't even tell people what it is.
Right,
All we know is the rules-based international order is what we decide it is on the spot.
exactly. And this right now with Israel, that whole issue, and with the ICC, it's the UN. We're really seeing that this rules-based order is, like you said, we make it up as we go along.
We make it up as we go along. And by the way, based on what the United States seems about to do, the rules-based international order won't include the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court because we don't like what they decide.
Right.
So we're thinking of excluding them from the rules-based international order. Congress is about to pass some legislation uh, condemning the International Criminal Court because we don't like what they've decided in relation to Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah, but it's fine for other countries.
It's fine for other countries, but we don't have to obey the rules of the rule-based international order because we make the rules as we go along.
Right. It wasn't meant for us and certain other states.
It wasn't meant for us or people we designate to follow the rules. It's for everybody else to follow it.
Exactly.
Ah,
Saudi Arabia, wary of its wealth parked in London and New York financial markets, is still cautiously hedging its bets. Theoretically, Riyadh is a BRICS member, but in practice, not really. Turkey has been invited as a partner. No official response yet. And then there's Southeast Asia powerhouse Indonesia, which has just been admitted as a full member this week under the Brazilian BRICS presidency. Called stretched out BRICS.
yeah. Okay, just a comment here for those who don't know. Okay, the population, okay, of Indonesia is the fourth largest in the world. Okay, I believe it is something like 280 million people, which is not far from the population of the United States at 340 million people. So, population wise, trade wise, uh, and location wise, they are a powerhouse.
hmm
And they were just admitted to BRICS.
The predominant vector of a seismic recalibration of the geopolitical tectonic plates bound to reshape trade, finance, and governance. BRICS and selected partners are configuring a formidable network bent on rewriting the rules of the game. Currently 10 full members and 8 full partners, and counting, making up 41.4% of global GDP by PPP and roughly half of the world's population. This is what the empire of chaos is up against.
Okay, for those who don't know, PPP is purchasing power parity, and it's a better way of measuring GDP than just using dollars, unadjusted. Okay, please go on.
Imagine China, India, Russia, Iran, Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, Egypt, Saudi Arabia as the transcontinental pearls of the emerging multinodal world. Huge populations, massive natural resources, and industrial might mirror development possibilities. The ruling elites of the Empire of Chaos have nothing to offer as a counterpoint to this growing geopolitical powerhouse, complete with its own development bank, granted that needs a lot of work, full commitment to develop and test alternative payment systems, and a sprawling transcontinental trade alliance bent on progressively sidestepping the US dollar. Instead of working on diplomacy, dialogue, and cooperation, the Empire of Chaos and the vassalized collective West do offer something to the global majority: their support for an ethnic cleansing genocide, and their full support for a suit and tie terror gang of moderate head choppers taking power in a former sovereign Arab nation. Welcome to terror and genocide are us.
I thought that was all very well put, but
Yes, yes, it is. Very well put.
do offer something. Our full support for ethnic cleansing, genocide, and full support for a suit and tie terror gang of moderate, quote unquote, head choppers.
Yeah.
Come on.
When in doubt, annex everything. Further developing on their accomplishments at the summit last October in Kazan, BRICS is essentially supplying a Sun Tzu strategy: deception, no grand proclamations, and no direct threats to the empire of chaos, except the clear focus on getting rid of the stranglehold of the IMF and the World Bank as an increasing trade in local currencies. The BRICS drive, slowly but surely, is already moving other multilateral pieces in the chessboard,
Hot.
from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to
Okay.
ASEAN, the ASEAN.
Hello, Deborah. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just finished that part, and I was thinking that whole problem with the IMF. Anytime I hear about a country, they're trying to get themselves in shape and everything else, and they're taking out an IMF loan. I'm like, oh my God, no, no, no. It's like, don't do it. It's like a spiral of debt.
Right. It's like a spiral of debt.
Top BRICS China will be focused on a tirade.
On a triad.
Triad, okay. The top BRICS China will be focused on a triad: the tech war against the US, increasing its share of global trade, and the recalibration of Belt and Roads Initiative projects. In several aspects, BRI is the centerpiece of China's approach to BRICS.
Right. And BRI again is the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes. Beijing's focus encompasses markets all across the global south: BRICS, ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, and APEC, key for trade and investment across the Asian Pacific. APEC happens to be closely linked to BRI. President Xi's focus on building and reinforcing a Eurasia-wide market was first conceptualized by Bree, launched in 2013.
When you think about it, that was an amazing thing, okay, that China did.
Uh-huh.
It was so far seeing, so visionary.
Yes. In parallel, since 2022, Foreign Minister Yang Yi has been steadily expanding on Xi's call for a, quote, new security architecture in the Middle East. For China, that means classic balance of power. Iran as a very strong pillar, partnering with China in West Asia to counter the US. In 2021, China and Iran signed a crucial 25-year blueprint on economic cooperation.
Okay, we have to add to that particular balance of power, I think, also Russia,
Yes.
because Russia, in just a few days now, on January 17th, is about to conclude a comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran. And of course, they already have that kind of partnership with China. So the three are going to be very, very close together, okay, on all dimensions.
Then there's energy. Roughly 50% of China's crude oil imports come from West Asia. China's suppliers on oil and gas are highly diversified: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, and Iran through Malaysia.
Okay, I have to disagree with that somewhat. Yes, all of those are suppliers of China, but uh, okay, the level of uh, uh, Chinese oil imports that comes actually from Iran is 40%, okay, of the 50%.
Okay.
So Iran is extremely dominant in supplying China with oil at this point. Okay, now China can diversify further, okay, if it wants to, but right now it's extremely dependent on the oil imports from Iran.
In parallel, Beijing will have no problem keeping Quad and AUKUS as minor nuances.
Yeah, those are alliances put together by the United States.
NATO pivoting to Asia is a non-starter.
Uh,
China,
right, and we can see from the other articles that it's a non-starter because NATO could be gone within 2 years entirely.
right,
So not only is it a non-starter, it's going to be gone.
right. China is fast building a complex strategy of area area denial. In Africa, the alliance of the Sahel states will keep expanding, and France has a neo-colonial power. It's done. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is indeed.
In the rest of Africa, the new decolonizing resistance only starts now.
Yeah, the big thing will be when the resistance comes to Nigeria
Yes,
because there's something like 215 million people there. They've been lagging behind when it comes to resistance.
Latin America, though, spells major trouble. The empire of chaos under Trump 2.0 may go full Monroe Doctrine, on top of the delirium of annexing Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, and any further unsuspecting latitudes. Overall, it will be a rough ride for selected nodes of the quote backyard, apart from devastated neo-colony Argentina.
Yeah, Argentina may be devastated within the next 6 months.
Yes.
Anyway,
Managing the U.S. defeat against Russia. Europe's collective suicide will reach paroxysm out of the utter corrosion of a social, industrial, and cultural model. The catalog of ills includes full woke dementia in Brussels, no more cheap energy, accelerated deindustrialization, economies in freefall, unpayable debt, public and private, and last but not least, in NATO stands co-democracy, the absolute contempt by the leadership of NATO EU for the average European citizen taxpayer when it comes to forcing severe cuts on social services to the benefit of increasing weaponizing.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think the regimes are going to fall, okay, in Europe.
Yes, they will.
I think the regime in Germany will fall. And then I think those regimes are going to pull out of Ukraine. They're not going to keep supporting Ukraine.
Right. Trump's 2.0's quite probable trade war against the EU will only accelerate the collapse of the European economy.
That could be.
Take France, already in a terrible mess. French debt now trades at Greek 2012 level. Spreads about German bonds. Spread about Germany's bonds. Over 50% of the 2.5 trillion euro French government bond is owned by a global vulture and hot money.
Oh, God.
There's no Mario Draghi with an ECB bazooka to save the euro from its new existential crisis. And Le Petit Roy is just a lame duck prisoner, hated even by Paris gut ratters.
Okay, Le Petit Roi, okay, is of course the president of France, uh, Mr. Macron.
Uh-huh.
Okay, or I should probably say Monsieur Macron.
Yes, he's a gutter rat.
Yes. Hated even by Paris gutter rats.
Yep. Historian, anthropologist, and demographer Emmanuel Todd, author of the groundbreaking you might as well say it, Joe.
La défaite de l'Occident. That means, okay, the defeat of the West.
Okay.
That's the translation in English.
Is one of the very few French intellectuals who actually understands the new rules of the game. In a startling interview to the privileged mouthpiece of the French haute bourgeois, Todd points to the absurdity of considering Trump victorious. Quote, amidst an economy in tatters, and on top of it, when, quote, the U.S. is losing a war on a global scale against Russia. Everybody's in a mess.
Uh, okay, there is a review. In other words, the review is linked. The review to Emmanuel Todd's book. He mentions, here is the first review in English. When you click on a link, you get a publication in Sputnik by Pepe Escobar. Uh, it was on January 18th, 2024, so it's a year old.
Okay.
Uh, and it's entitled How the West Was Defeated. Okay, and so you can click on that if you want, okay, and go to his review of the book.
So, amidst all the hoopla about the hyper power of Trump as a magic individual, Todd has come up with a stunning, crystal clear formulation. Trump's job will be to manage the defeat of the U.S. against Russia.
Yeah, I think it certainly will be, but the question is, how will he manage, okay, the defeat of the U.S. against the combination of Russia, China, and Iran,
Yeah.
because to me it looks like a good possibility that there's going to be a disaster in West Asia also. Uh, it's beginning to look increasingly likely that the Iranians are going to deliver True Promise 3 over the next few days.
I heard something like that too.
Yeah, they certainly seem to be working up to it. And they've been exhibiting, they're now starting to exhibit some photographic evidence of their underground cities full of missiles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's on YouTube. See our cities full of missiles
Yeah.
underground in the mountains where you can't get at them.
Yeah, it's the message.
It's a message. Yeah, don't you dare attack us, US.
Syria as Libya 2.0. Well, all of us pop culture junkies know that the US will keep on, quote, winning the Hollywood way, rather the World Wrestling Foundation way. What's certain is that no matter which Trump 2.0's missiles are launched in trade wars against Europe and Asia, the cornered, entitled elites of the Empire of Chaos will be driven to inflict tremendous harm to the global majority. Victory in Syria has sent them into a drunken stupor, and the real men go to Tehran mindset is back with a vengeance. Iran, not by accident, is a top BRICS member. All the conditions are met for Syria to become Libya 2.0. Yet that's not a case of the house always wins. First of all, because there is no house. In neighboring Lebanon, Hezbollah is already reorganized. The prospect remains that after regrouping and re-strategizing, Hezbollah and Sarella in Yemen, a new Syrian opposition, and the IRCG in Iran will coalesce in a different formation and renew the real battle against Eretz Israel. No one knows what Salafi jihadi in suit and tie, Ahmed al-Shara, previously Abu Muhammad al-Julani, is actually ruling over. At various degrees, the collective West, the Persian Gulf monarchies, and Israel will never trust him and will deem him disposable. He is just a temporary useful patsy. Al-Julani was the ISIS emir of Nineveh. Nevea.
Okay, I think you're right the first time. Okay, it's
Okay.
the ancient capital, okay, of Assyria.
Okay. The emir of Jabhat al-Nusra and the prime emir of al-Qaeda in the Levant. He single-handedly personifies the whole gamut of manufactured Western propaganda on, quote, terror. His followers are already furious that he has not instantly turned Syria into an Islamic emirate. If he does not transfer power in 2025, and not in 4 years, to a newly elected parliament, government, and president, forget what sanctions be lifted on Israel. Yes. The empire of chaos, not to mention Tel Aviv, in fact, wanted Syria in permanent chaos. Certainly not a stable representative government that will fight against the theft of their oil, gas, and wheat.
Yes, the ongoing theft of their oil, gas, and wheat by the United States.
Exactly. Then there's the looming frontal clash between Eretz Israel and Turkey's Neo-Ottomanism. The Turkish project to control Syria is wobbly at best. The Empire of Chaos will not give up the Kurds. The Turkish Foreign Ministry is already spinning the possibility of military operation. Yeah, I saw that. In parallel, Arab money will not start flowing to rebuild Syria unless Damascus is totally beholden to the Persian Gulf monarchies. It's all about debt and industrial production. BRICS, of course, is riven by a serious internal contradictions, which will be ruthlessly exploited by the Empire of Chaos, starting with Iran, UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, when the Saudis show up for meetings, struggling to reach consensus on the same table. Add to it the domestic contradictions of a powerful anti-BRICS lobby in Brazil, even inside the foreign ministry, mirroring the internal Iranian dispute between die-hard Axis of Resistance supporters and the Atlanticist-leaning crowd. What matters most at the institutional level is that China-Russia at the highest BRICS sphere and also across the soft power sphere keep emphasizing equality, harmony, and focus on human development as crucial politico-economic values totally in sync with global majority. What will not change, even under relentless empire of chaos pressure, is the BRICS drive to build a parallel, really democratic system of international relations that does not imply building BRICS counterpart to NATO. Even the SCO works as a loose alliance. Following the inescapable American defeat in Ukraine, NATO sooner or later will implode, side by side with its political propaganda arm, the EU. Professor Michael Hudson, once again, has hit the nail on the collective head. The crux of the matter is foreign debt. Quote, there is no way the BRICS countries can grow and at the same time pay the foreign debts that'll be saddled with for the last 100 years and especially since 1945. These dollar bonds are held by comprador oligarchical elites who don't want to hold their own currencies because the global south countries and their oligarchies realize the debt can't be paid. So, BRICS countries, in order to grow, have to write down their debts and solve the clash between vested interest and national interest. Professor Hudson is adamant that, quote, the domestic parasites need to deal with it, so BRICS are able to, quote, erect a new international trade and finance structure. The empire of chaos, of course, quote, will ally with local parasites to foment what else? Chaos, regime change, and terror. As much as the BRICS will need to come up with a concerted economic philosophy, let's say, realistically, over the next 4 years or so, the geoeconomic writing is already on the wall. Since the start of the millennium, U.S. industrial production grew by only 10%, and since 2019 by literally zero. In comparison, since 2000, China's industrial production grew by 1,000%, India's by 320%, and Russia's by over 200%. Developed NATO stand has not been growing since pre-COVID 2019. Western Europe peaked in 2007-8, and Germany peaked in 2017. Italy is a very sorry affair. Industrial production actually decreased by 25% since 2000. And to it, the empire of chaos, compared to Russia, is absolutely non-competitive in weapons production, and frankly, risible when it comes to hypersonic and missile defense.
Yes.
A feasible roadmap for BRICS Plus and the global majority counteract the imperial strategy of uncontrolled chaos would be to accelerate integration on all spheres, to apply Sun Tzu's to increase the blowback quotient of Trump 2.0 moves, and to force silos of the deep state to make serious, serial miscalculated decisions. Such approach will have to progress in sync with the BRICS devised diversity is strength strategy, where each nation and partner brings to the common table a wealth of raw materials, energy resources, manufacturing know-how, logistics, and last but not least, soft power. Altogether, the lineaments of a new equitable order capable of dissolving uncontrolled chaos.
Yes.
That,
Uh, I'm not sure what that actually means. Uh, Real riches, of course, are the raw materials, the energy resources, the manufacturing, the know-how, proper logistics, and of course, soft power. Uh, I suppose if BRICS can develop those things, okay, over a period of time, then it would be capable of dissolving uncontrolled chaos.
right,
But that's going to be difficult with the empire of chaos continually hitting at the BRICS members,
right.
okay, in their weak spots. So the question is, what could stop that? And I think what could stop that is if Trump uh, really wants to change foreign policy along lines articulated by Scott Ritter and by Doug MacGregor, uh, then the empire of chaos would no longer be acting like the empire of chaos. Okay, it would be changing. It would not be hitting at the BRICS members. It would try to find ways to collaborate with the BRICS members. And that would change okay, the set of predictions uh, uh, actually that Pepe is making here. Okay, he's saying that the world is going to develop in a particular way and that there are going to be continuing conflicts between the BRICS nations and the collective West. But whether that is the future or not is going to greatly depend on what the Trump administration sets out to do. Uh, he does have the capability, if he brings peace to Ukraine and he brings peace to West Asia, to head that off in those areas. Then I think the action will shift, okay, to Latin America. Can he develop a collaborative policy in Latin America, or will he insist on trying to focus the imperialism of the United States in North and South America alone? And if he does that, won't he come into conflict, with the Brazilians? Because overwhelmingly, in terms of population and potential for development, the leading nation of South America is, of course, Brazil, and they are, when I say on the verge, may take 10 or 15 years, but they could become a great power within 10 or 15 years. Will the United States move to block that? Or will we collaborate with Brazil, allowing that? I think that's a big question. Okay.
That's it. It would be nice if we would collaborate and talk to people.
Yes. And I think Pepe is in a perfect position to discuss the possibilities of that at length, since he is Brazilian himself. And I know he keeps in touch, close touch, with local politics there. So I think what we did tonight through these 4 articles is we really covered the developments in geopolitics of the world by looking at it through the lens of what the Trump administration could possibly do or might do, okay, or is likely to do. And then we contrasted that with Pepe's ideas, okay, about the kind of fate that can possibly await the BRICS nations in their efforts to create, a different world. And Pepe's view of that is also conditional on what the hegemon will do. If Trump puts together a foreign policy that withdraws from the hegemonic idea, and if Trump refrains from trying to apply that idea on a smaller scale to Latin America, then we all might be facing a much brighter future, okay, than otherwise. But I think the hardest thing for Trump to do, harder than backing off from West Asia, harder than backing off from China, and certainly harder than backing off, okay, from Europe, would be to back off from trying to dominate in South America. I think that's going to be a hard thing for him to do. I think especially so because of the people that he's been appointing to head up our foreign policy. So that's the area that I am most pessimistic about, okay, in terms of the future. Shall we see what other comments await us?
Yes, sounds like a good idea. You've got comments there.
Yep. I have another comment from Evelina. A lot of competition for Greenland. Ultimately, the choice, okay, of Greenlanders. Yes, I look at it that way. I hope that others look at it that way too. Lana says, I don't think BRICS is ready to roll just yet. It definitely needs to be taken into account. Well, I kind of disagree with that from the standpoint that I think that BRICS is already rolling in terms of the nations of BRICS doing increased business with one another. Okay, even when we get to India, there's been a tremendous increase in business between India, okay, and Russia recently, and between China, okay, and India also recently. Okay, so India is more and more fully a part, okay, of BRICS. Of course, China and Russia are very close. The Iranians are getting very close to China, okay, and Russia. There's a tremendous groupings of population just in those nations, okay, I've mentioned. Okay, if we consider other nations of West Asia getting closer to BRICS, and if we consider that Indonesia uh, has just taken the major step of becoming a full member, okay, of BRICS, it looks very promising for the integration of Southeast Asia into BRICS actually fairly quickly. So I think that BRICS is already rolling and will be rolling increasingly faster over the next 5 years. John B. says China recognizes the U.S.'s irretrievable decline as a major export target. BRI is developing replacement markets with the added bonus that it enables spending have increasingly threatened the U.S. dollar reserves. Not sure what you mean by increasingly threatened, U.S. dollar reserves. I don't see U.S. dollar reserves as threatened. John B says, I suspect China has judged that it's better to spend than lose their USDs. Issuing USD bonds may be a play to bring forward their spending of accumulated USD export earnings. Your thoughts, Joe? Yeah, I agree. Okay, I think it is a ploy to bring forward their spending of accumulated USD. And I think they have judged that it's better to spend than to lose their USDs. And I think over a period of time that they will be spending them, gradually divesting themselves of U.S. dollar bonds and U.S. dollar reserves. I fully expect that the MMTers have been predicting that for some time, but they also think that has been gradually happening and that it will be gradually happening. Sometimes I look at it, okay, in this way. Right now, 58% of the world's trade is going on in dollar reserves. Uh, I believe it's 58%. It might be down to 53% now. Okay, regardless, I think we'll continue to see declines in that, but that even after the next 10 years, that still 30 to 35% of international trade will still be using the US dollar. So that's a gradual decline. We have plenty of time to adjust to that particular decline. What we have to do here is to develop manufacturing capability and manufacturing resources. And I think we will begin to do that again. And we will replace the need for foreign products with our own products.
How about the schools?
Well, of course, the schools. We have to provide a robust system of free education here for all, and we have to have it go from the cradle to the end of graduate school. We need to have a free education for all. Lana says, I hope you don't mind a healthcare announcement. You know I never mind a healthcare announcement. JPM Chase is hosting a healthcare forum in San Francisco on Monday and Tuesday. The hotel information is not here, but Jordan Sheridan found the man who is organizing the protest. He posted a video today. Oh, cool. And Lana says, this event is by invitation only, and invitations aren't transferable. Contact your JP Morgan representative for more information. The 43rd Annual Healthcare Conference will take place on January 13th to 16th. Lana says, I meant BRICS having their own currency. I don't think they're going to have their own currency for a while. And I don't think it's essential. If they trade in their own local currencies, and they develop a mechanism for accounting for what's going on with trade in local currencies, that will be enough for them to work their way away from the dollar for some time to come. It will probably take them a long time to develop a current currency. I think maybe 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's going to be this year or next year or the year after. Lana says these countries are already working together. Yes, they are. John B. says, when the inevitable confrontation with China occurs, the U.S. will flex their control of China's foreign reserves held in U.S. banks. U.S. had no trouble freezing Russia's USDs. I call that a threat. Yeah, I think it's a threat, but if foreign countries begin to trade, in local currencies, then China won't have to be worried about its dollar reserves held, in U.S. banks. If they lose those, okay, if they're confiscated, then China can trade, simply in, using their own local currency. China is one step away from becoming a monetary sovereign. All that it has to do is to quit uh, 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 pegging its currency to the dollar. And Steve says, hello, everybody. Hi, Lana. And hi, Steve. I'm so glad to see you here. I'm very glad to find that you're safe. And I gather you're safe because you're here. I think that is evidence of you being safe. Our daughter is also safe, but she is in Burbank. And Burbank has been hardly hit but by the fires, except for the fact that it smells bad there. I understand. John B. says, I worry that if Trump manages to claim Canada as the 51st state, Australia will be next as the 52nd. He's not going to be successful in claiming Canada as the 51st state. If he wants to get Canada involved, he's going to have to give Canada at least 9 states. That means he's going to have to give Canada 18 senators. And he's going to have to create also new representatives for the 40 million people who live in Canada using the same formula as we have, for the United States. But I don't think the Canadians are going to want to become part of the United States. Okay, even if they get 9 whole states, I don't think that's going to be enough for them. Lana says, how is everything, Steve? Have you evacuated? He says, Lana, I am safe, thank you. Lana says, Canada has offered to take Minnesota. I am okay with it. I have only a few hours for the border. I personally think what Canada needs to take is California, Oregon, also Washington, Nevada as well, all the north central states, and all of the New England states, and also New York and New Jersey, okay, and Pennsylvania. And I think all of these areas ought to join Canada. I think there's something like 210 million people in all of those states. That would make Canada a great power overnight. They'd be a much nicer great power than we would. John B. says, but China loses its export earned wealth if the U.S. steals their USD reserves. Not worth the risk, I suggest. Well, I don't know. If China is a monetary sovereign or quickly becomes one, it will be able to trade, using its own currency, and its financial wealth is going to be unlimited because it will have the power of creating an unlimited amount of its own currency. Okay, within a few years, Chinese currency is likely to be just as acceptable in international trade as US dollars. So I'm not sure the risk is very great. As Steve, I hope the new currency is actual bricks. Maybe so. John B. says the Australian politicians are stupid enough to give Australia away. Just look at AUKUS. I actually have considerable respect for Australian people and for politicians in Australia. I think generally they're more sensible than our politicians. They have a much stronger safety net, okay, than we have. Uh, I've had considerable communications with Australians, not only within the MMT community, but before that as well, okay, within the knowledge management community. And I have a great deal of respect for Australians. I think they are wonderful people. So I am a philo Australian, if you want. Lana says, I thought China was sovereign over its currency now. Well, strictly speaking, in terms of the definition of monetary sovereign, if a country pegs its currency to the value of the dollar, okay, it's not a monetary sovereign. I think China still does that. It certainly did it, as of a few years ago. And John B says, how can the yuan be used for trade? They're a net exporter. There are few yuan in the forex market. Okay, I may be mistaken about this, but don't they trade in foreign exchange? Okay, do they use the yuan or do they use the uh, 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 the renminbi for trading purposes? I am not certain. You may know more about that than I do, John B. In any case, I think they can shift to using their own currency in the foreign exchange market, and that is likely to be very acceptable even now. I think they're in a very strong position, and they don't have to worry about our confiscating their foreign exchange. I mean, it hasn't exactly been devastating for Russia that we confiscated their, 300 billion. Okay, but I'm not sure which name they use, okay, in international trade. I know they're using the USD, but I don't think they have to use the USB. Okay, when they trade with Russia, I don't think they're using USD. When they trade with Iran right now, I don't think they're using USD. I think they're using Chinese currency. And I think the movement towards the BRICS nations actually using local currencies will involve the Chinese using their currency and not the dollar reserves. I think for trading with Latin America, they're going to use dollar reserves, okay, at least in the short run, because they have a lot of the dollar reserves. And I think Latin American nations need dollar reserves to get the IMF off their back. Okay, but I think the Chinese still have a very large amount of dollar reserves. What is it? Something like $2 trillion in dollar reserves right now. China has strict currency controls. That's how they keep the renminbi value low, and enhancing export volumes. Okay, well, we'll see what they do, but I think they will be able to use their own currency, in international trade whenever they decide to do that. Steve says, Doc, did your daughter get that false alarm to evacuate Frito Sol out? No, she did not get a false alarm, okay, to evacuate. The fires, I guess, never reached Burbank. So she's been very safe through this whole thing. She's been monitoring it, of course, very closely. But when she decided to move to Burbank, it was a very good choice for her.
Smell was bad
Yeah, there was some air pollution. There's virtually no one out here in Forex, Joe. Well, thank you, John B. I'm glad to know that. Maybe China's got to start to put someone out there in foreign exchange. That would be very important. I got to stop sharing because we're no longer going over the article. Okay, so are we done for the night, D?
Yes, I think we are. I think you covered a lot.
Yeah, we covered a lot. Thank you very much for joining me and for going through the articles with me and for your commentary. I think everything worked very well tonight. I was I
I
was
think so
glad
too.
to be back, and I'm very glad that you were with me tonight also.
Yes, I was happy you were back too. It was good to be talking to you again.
Okay, thank you, D. And good night, Lana. And John B., thank you very much for your information. And John B. says, bye all. Thanks all. Steve Wolfbrand says, Burbank is a very nicely run community. Best roads. Yes, Devore says it's very nicely run as well. And, she actually lights it there. And she feels it's very safe in part because of the way they have, run the community, the way they've managed it. That it's very well managed. And she's been happy there, but she is on the point of wanting to leave California.
Mm.
I think she's going to be coming back east actually fairly soon.
So that's nice for you. You and
Yeah,
Bonnie.
it'll be nice to have it closer. She's not going to come to the Washington area because she wants to go to sunny areas.
Right.
But of course, it's hard to find sunny areas here in the east that will not be subject to flooding and to natural disasters of various kinds. Uh, I think we're pretty safe actually here in Virginia, uh, at least in our part of Virginia. In Northern Virginia,
Right.
uh, we really haven't had any bad events for a long time. And of course, we do have cold weather here, but it's not too cold. It's not too bad. But she really likes the warm weather. I suspect eventually she's going to settle probably in northern Florida somewhere.
Yeah. Northern Florida, northeastern Florida is nice.
Yeah, and maybe not so subject to natural disasters.
Right.
So that's the way I think it is.
Okay.
So everybody, good night. I will be back on my regular schedule next week. That means I will be back on Tuesday night, and I will be on Thursday night at 8 o'clock. My regular schedule is Tuesday night at 9 p.m., Thursday night at 8 p.m., Saturday night, okay, at 9 p.m. And I will also be joining Dee more next week as well.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that as well.
For some of her streams as well. I'll certainly be joining her on Thursday night. I may well be joining her on Wednesday night as well, or on
Okay.
Friday night. So, thank you very much, Steve, for showing up. I am relieved to see that you're safe.
Yes, it's good that, yes, I was happy to see you tonight too.
So, good night, everybody.
Yes, good night, everybody. Yes, and it was good that we all know that Steve is safe and everybody's here is safe.
Yes, that is really great.
Yes. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, good night, Dee.
Yes. Good night.
Okay, good night, everybody. Good night, Lana. So I got to end the stream. There we go. Steve says thank you. Well, thank you for coming, Steve.